have died so far. This, I believe, is a conservative estimate. This even with more than 7.5 million vaccine doses administered in 184 countries in the first 11 months of 2011. Now, that being said, we are seeing several world economies jump-starting and appearing to be on a path to recovery. The question remains, will this lead to a truly post-COVID world in 2022? Could the changes we witness cause a return to the type of slow growth experienced after the 2008 global financial crisis? Is the current high inflation here to stay? Or are we at the cusp of a braver, exciting new world, having emerged stronger from the COVID experience? Now, what are some of the big picture structural changes we are likely to see in 2022? The pandemic has certainly brought into sharp relief and I would say, in a thought-provoking way, the disparity between the haves and have-nots. Even with donations and further pledges by the US, China, and Europe, 42 low and middle income countries, representing no less than 1.1 billion people, have only enough to fully vaccinate 10% of their population. Now, this brings us to the second theme, the challenge to capitalist democracy. The general expectation is a widening of the divide between the North and South, between the haves and the have-nots, and between the East and West, so to speak, a bifurcation. US and European foreign aid is increasingly likely to have a countering China agenda. Now, this includes the G7's recent partnership to, quote, build back better world, or B3W. Now, likewise, there's been growing power rivalry in technology areas such as 5G, fintech, social media, and of course, cryptocurrency. The US and Europe will continue to highlight human rights violations by China and Russia. For example, China's mistreatment of the Muslim Uyghurs in the Xinjiang province. Likewise, we can expect repeated criticism of China's transgression of the rule of law in the South China Sea and its alleged exploitation in Africa and some countries in South Asia. China and Russia and others, on the other hand, will increasingly point to the dysfunctionalities of democracies. Put bluntly, the heavy price to pay for unabated freedoms. Studies show that in terms of global wealth distribution, the poorest 50% own just 2% of total wealth, while the richest 10% own 76% of global wealth. Even in terms of carbon emissions, there appears to be a disparity between the haves and have-nots and between the West and the rest. In the USA, the bottom 50% of the population emits 10 tons of carbon, while East Asia emits 3 tons. The numbers are even more telling when you look at emission figures of the top 10%. East Asia, 39 tons, and for the USA, it's a whopping 73 tons. Now, we can expect aggressive lobbying by the US and China in 2022. More countries will be under pressure to choose. As they say, you're with me or against me. The third big theme is about exciting possibilities that are emerging thanks to the human spirit that refuses to be cowed by adversity. We are seeing in the present what the future of work is going to be. Flexible work arrangements is the order of the day, thanks to COVID-19 and a general push for choices. A PwC survey in August of 2021 showed US employees wanting to work remotely part or all of the week as they juggle work, home lives, caregiving responsibilities, and mental stability. Employers, on the other hand, show a preference for work in person, at least for some of the time. Also, there's this great resignation, you may have heard of it, where more people are quitting their jobs and reprioritizing their lives. There appears to be a growing preference for the gig economy. Now, social media is increasingly at the center of human existence. The COVID pandemic has increased the reliance on it, the comfort in using it, and the level of trust. It has become the default means for governments to inform, educate, and even entertain the public, as well as galvanize them. I'm certain this provided the impetus for the metaverse. Mark Zuckerberg, founder and CEO of Facebook, even announced a brand name change to Meta, M-E-T-A. Microsoft is the other big player in the space, which is also backed by major brands such as Nike, Gucci, and Prada. Essentially, the idea is to enable users to interact, socialize, and create content in the virtual environment and subsequently monetize transactions using blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. Now, also known as 3Web, the metaverse is intrinsically linked to non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, that enable the creation and selling of digital artifacts. The expressed idea or ideal of all these developments in the cyber world with the use of blockchain, cryptocurrency, and tokens is financial inclusivity. They are designed to democratize access to opportunities by allowing investors of all sizes to engage in a wide range of assets in the real or cyber world. It is about giving life to the adage, you can be and do whatever you want. It's this same zeal that has propelled the likes of Elon Musk, Richard Branson, and Jeff Bezos to enter a space where only governments played. They have launched private space companies, SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, and Blue Origin. They are planning on launching thousands of low-orbit satellites into the atmosphere this year, 2022. The mission is to bring fast, reliable broadband internet at a reasonable price to every corner of the world to democratize access. How exciting. Yes, but most unfortunately, there is a big downside. With so many things connected, the Internet of Things, metaverse, cryptocurrency, and tokenization, we can and must expect an exponential increase in cyber attacks. There will be a dramatic rise in hacking, phishing, and even complete takeover of computer systems. Now, all this simply means that governments have to work a lot closer with the private sector and the people sector. For this, there has to be a genuine willingness to share, consult, and listen. There has to be trust. There has to be a deep desire to move from zero-sum to win-win, from competition to collaboration, from seeing each other as the enemy to working together against a common threat. So, has the Great Reset really happened? Will 2022 be the year of positive change, or will the pandemic be a wasted opportunity? To help us have a more critical and meaningful discussion, we have a panel of 5 well-known and respected talk show hosts and interviewers from various parts of the world. Anel Madoda, a popular South African radio and TV personality, author, and interviewer. Gautam Mukunda, host of NASDAQ's World Reimagined program, where he interviews global leaders. He's also a research fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Center for Public Leadership. Temina Kasuji, a journalist of Indian origin based in Malaysia, who has also made a name for herself as a producer, activist, and actress. She is particularly known for her advocacy towards gender equality and social justice. Kylie Wang, host of a popular daily news and talk show podcast in Taiwan, a well-known champion of human rights, freedom of speech, and LGBT rights. Last but certainly not least, Darren Muck from Singapore. He's host of Plan B, a Singapore-based podcast. Now, IQ International is committed to ensuring that the voices of youths from around the world are heard in each discussion. We have today 4 youth representatives who will openly share their perspectives, hopes, and probe with incisive questions. Ramita Chatterjee from India, Edison Nguyen from United Kingdom, Richard Celestine from Malaysia, and Zala Sarmas from Afghanistan. With that, let's kick off the discussion. I would like to start with this question to my panelists, a broad enough question, I believe, as a curtain raiser. Here's the question. What do you think 2022 has in store for the world, for us? Do we have reason to be hopeful? If yes, why? If no, why not? And I'd like to request that we keep it to 3 minutes each, please. So who'd like to go first?
Not all at once.
All right. We'll go with you. Adele?
Anele.
Sorry, Anel. Anele, we'll go with you first.
I actually just realized that it was my son's name that's on here because he uses the computer sometimes. So I quickly changed it for everyone. Well, in South Africa, it's afternoon. So I'm going to say good afternoon. And thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. And hello to my fellow panelists. And your question is, do we as the world have a right to be hopeful about 2022? So I'm going to run you through my world, because obviously that's the only way I can make a statement, is what my living is, what my daily reality is, and where we headed this year. I mean, I'm in a country where there are 5 factors that are making us not hopeful. Our gender-based violence is at an all-time high, and you'll find all of the 5 things that I'm saying to you, I do believe I've got a common thread. Our unemployment, especially our youth unemployment, the numbers are staggering. We're looking at 60% in youth unemployment. And when you look at those numbers, there are you can look at numbers of youth unemployment and people who are still looking for jobs, and those who have decided to just stop looking for jobs altogether and they're sitting idle doing nothing. That's at 60%. Our corruption, which is feeding to our unemployment, which therefore feeds to our GBV, also at an all-time high. In fact, we've got a huge state case happening at the moment in South Africa called the Zondo Commission, where the president has set out an entire commission to find out where the money is going. And, speaking of COVID and COVID-19, our relief resources were looted, in the state. So there's a huge commission happening for that. Our biggest political party being the ANC, suffering from what I call the Facebook. If we can all agree that Facebook has become so big that it's too big to fail. This is why, as much as you may like them or hate them, Facebook can't fail because of the systems that they what's the word I'm looking for? The systems that they engineer in the world. And then, of course, all of these point to crime. Our crime staggering, murder, rape, theft, burglary, also at an all-time high. So when those 5 things are presented to me every single day, because I am on radio every single day doing, one of the biggest breakfast shows in the country. And I almost call my radio show, you have to be bipolar, because the news happens at the top of the hour, 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock. And the news is all corruption, murder, crime, unemployment, gender-based violence. And then as soon as the news is done, I must play music. And we must be happy, and we must we must talk about Kim Kardashian and Beyonce and Kanye West. So I must live a bipolar existence. And this is why I believe that I have the right to be hopeful about the world this year. I have a right to be hopeful about my country, because we are bipolar. Things are bad, and when they're bad, they're really bad. And when things are good, they're really good. But it takes it down to something that I've always believed in. What is wrong with the world is that everybody who's sitting at a decision-making table across the planet is one type of person, and that's the issue. As soon as you allow people to get in on the table who's not one type of person, because the truth of the matter is, I am not what you are. So when I come to the table and you allow me there, I'm not there to take your place. I don't have the same opinion as you. I don't have the same upbringing as you. I don't have the same goals as you. Yet I do believe that I deserve a space at your table, because when I come in, all of a sudden, you and I have got a dual existence. Bipolar. We need to be bipolar if we're going to succeed, because we can't always hear from one person, and we can all hear, nod, and say we've been listening to one person, and it doesn't matter how many people how many women Forbes puts on the cover of Forbes magazine. The truth of the matter is that women across the world are left outside conversations that bring power, and let's be fair, power is money. Right? And women are left out of that conversation, yet we have so much to bring to the table. Right? I mean, I look at even inclusivity, the buzzword, everybody, inclusive, everybody inclusive, transformation, that's the buzzword. But the truth of the matter is, you can't only call me to the table to mine my ideas. You have to call me to the table to split the profit of my ideas. And this is why the world is here today. Only one person is benefiting, only one person is getting the slice of the pie. And this is where I think we need to change this year. And this is how I have hope? Yes, I do. 2022 is going to be great, because everybody We're not scared to lose anything. We've lost so much in the last 2 years. I mean, personally, I was in hospital last year taking out my gallbladder. And when I was faced with a true isolation, I thought I was isolated when it was COVID, I wasn't. When I was in hospital for 30 days, faced with true isolation, something happened with me where I was like, you know what? The things I was scared to lose, it means that I don't need them because you can't operate on fear. And I feel that the people who are making the decisions in the world are operating on fear because they fear to lose something. And as soon as you fear to lose something, it releases an acid. And now this is where we are. We're having acidic decisions being made for an entire population of the world. Am I hopeful? Yes, I am.
Wonderful.
But we have to have more than one thought of frame. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. I love your passion and your conviction. It's coming through so loud and clear. Do I call you Anele or Anel?
Anele, yes.
Anele. Anele, I've got a question, a follow-up question. You mentioned quite in passing Facebook,
Yes.
and that Facebook dominates. It's true. I mean, we all experience that. Even where you don't approve of Facebook, you can't live without it. It's become indispensable, so to speak. But could you elaborate a little bit more about the Facebook dimension in creating some of the problems that you talked about in South Africa?
Well, for one, I think the world experienced Facebook and what the power it can have in the election of Donald Trump, because I must use, examples that we can all nod to, right? The power in how Donald Trump and, the propaganda that can be pushed. And I feel that South Africa also has that. You must remember, South Africans, because of apartheid, we're also very polarized, right? We're very polarized and we antagonize each other and we speak past each other because of my hurt is so tangible, and I'm right to be hurt as a Black person in South Africa. Yet at the same time, the fear of a white person who feels that all I want to do is for them to leave and to get out the country, be it in a body bag or be it on a plane. So in that sense, Facebook is terrible when it comes to the way that it spreads information. But I want to go a little bit deeper, and I'm not a techie at all, so if anybody here who's into tech, please feel free to put up your hand and say you're lying. But when it comes to the pure systems that Facebook, I call it the home body. Facebook can't fail. So remember when Facebook was hacked, and there was a system, then they had to go fix it somewhere, and it was going to take them, 20 hours to get there to go fix it. The entire world stopped because Facebook was down. You can't have that because it's almost like a country being invaded and then their communication systems are the first thing that you go for. And when Facebook failed, literally there was a complete darkness around the world where communication couldn't get to each other. And when Facebook goes down, I call it the Zaka universe. He may call it Maker, he should have called it the Zaka universe. And when that happened, everything absolutely stopped, and other things couldn't operate, like the Googles of the world and search machines and search engines. So that's why I feel like, as much as Facebook, once again, it's a bipolar thing. Facebook is a good thing because it is the machine, it is the engine of so much tech in the world right now, but at the same time, it's a bad thing.
Right. Thank you. Gautam, can we go to you?
Absolutely, Viswa. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you. The last 2 years of the pandemic have obviously been brutal, but if we look at signs of hope, I think there are two things that should make us feel really, really enthusiastic about the year going forward. The first is, and also she's not a techie. Well, I am a techie. I spent a long time at MIT, and the technological miracle that we have experienced in the last years with the development of the vaccines, it is genuinely hard to overstate the scale of the achievement that we're looking at. The scientists were able to develop an extraordinarily effective and over 90% effective vaccine to a novel virus within a year. In fact, Moderna's initial vaccine, the initial vaccine design, the one that they actually ended up putting into production, was developed in 48 hours.
Yes.
Just a few years ago, the normal timeline to develop a vaccine was in excess of 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
And this sort of the technology that underlay the RNA vaccines that have been the most successful ones is what we call a platform technology. It's a technology that enables not just the development of this one vaccine, but sort of a countless number of treatments for different diseases, even for cancer, in ways that we could not even have imagined a few years ago. So if you were looking for a sign of hope in the midst of what after all is medical disaster, the fact that our ability to manipulate the living world has reached such a level that we are able to do this where in fact, as the science continues to evolve and regulation continues to evolve, you can imagine vaccines like this being developed in months or even weeks instead of years. It's hard to see that and not think about how the world will think about that as a world of hope. That I think our parents and our grandparents would look at that remarkable transformation and be nothing more than awe. And the second indicator of hope that I take away from this,
sorry, Gautam, just a quick follow-up question, right? I'm curious. I mean, the from 11 years or 13 years sometimes for FDA approval for the drug, it's come down to less than a year, right? And as you said, Moderna, even a few months. Is it because we have actually been able to do it faster, or is it because of complacency before?
So no, it's absolutely because we were able to do it faster. The underlying technologies for the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, what called mRNA technologies, have been the product of research for 20 or 30 years. When you read about the scientists who did it, the word heroic is not an overstatement, right? These are people who dedicated their careers in the face of rejection and you know, in some cases poverty, in their belief that these techniques could change the world, and did. One of my colleagues and I were discussing if this disease had happened if this disease had broken out 5 years ago, how long would it have taken us to develop the vaccine? And the answer was probably 5 years, because that's how long it would have taken us to get to the point where the science could do it this quickly. We literally have just developed the techniques that enabled us to do what we did.
It's amazing. So it's providential.
I mean, providential in the sense that the American baseball Louis Pasteur once said that you know, chance favors the prepared mind. So it was providential, but it was the effort of, you know, the product of enormous amounts of effort that put us in a position to be favored by providence. But I'll just note that the second sign of hope we should take from this pandemic is not just a story of brilliant scientists or, you know, or managers or engineers who put this together. If too many leaders around the world failed us, you know, I live in the United States, where Donald Trump's performance in the face of the pandemic was, you know, would have been a punchline if it wasn't so tragic. Ordinary people did not. The media spends a lot of time talking about people who refuse the vaccine and refuse masks, and those are real phenomena. We shouldn't deny them, and we shouldn't trick ourselves into believing that it's a new thing. If you look at news stories about the 1918 influenza pandemic, there were in fact news reports of people who refused to wear masks and said that this was not their problem, and so that tendency of people to refuse to do things for the common good is not new.
Yeah.
But when you look at the particular risk profile this disease presented, if you were young and you were healthy, the risks were quite low. They were actually quite low to you. And yet we saw all around the world, certainly in the United States, we saw young people voluntarily, not under force of law here in my country, refrain from even the basics of human interaction, not because they themselves were at risk, but because they felt it was their obligation to their community, to their parents, to do that. And I think we should not underestimate both the scale of sacrifice that this involves. Cutting yourself off from human interactions is an extraordinarily painful experience. John McCain, sort of the late American senator, you know, the sort of widely loved hero, he was tortured for many years when he was a prisoner in Vietnam. And he always said that the worst part of that experience was not the torture so bad that for the rest of his life, he could not raise his arms higher than this. He said that the worst part of that experience was the isolation, when they kept him in solitary confinement. That was worse than torture. And so human beings, we are wired to need social connection as profoundly and as powerfully as we need food and air. And yet, all around the world, right, people said that they would cut themselves off from others voluntarily and for really not very much risk on their own behalf, simply because they knew it was the right thing to do to protect other people. I think we too easily gloss over what a remarkable thing that is, and just how, you know, just how much we should really admire a generation of people who, the statistics actually say more than their parents who actually were at risk were willing to stand up and say, you know what, I will make this sacrifice for everyone else. The people who did that for 2 years, I think we should be very hopeful about what they're going to keep doing.
Yeah. Thank you, Gautam. I think I particularly like your last point. We tend to vacillate towards seeing the bottle as half empty. We tend to vacillate quite often to pointing out all the negatives in society, and even as you were describing this phenomenon that you witnessed, I was reflecting on all the good things that were happening in Singapore, in this part of the world, but we fail to cover it. I mean, news media only highlights all the negatives, simply because good news doesn't spread. I think that needs to change, and social media needs to find a way to also balance good news with bad news, not because you're fabricating it or forcing it, because good news does exist. It's just that it's not sensational. And the world needs to change in that sense. And thank you for reminding us of that, Gautam. Thank you very much. Thank you. Tamina, could we go to you next?
Yes, certainly. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Lovely to be in such awesome company with so many like-minded individuals. I just wanted to vibe a little bit of what Gautam was saying, as well as Viswa, and of course, going back to what Anele actually stated at the beginning, right? For me, myself, personally, I would say I'm quite measured in my expectations for 2022. So I cover the current affairs beat with a particular focus on marginalization, inequity, gender inequality, and what Anele said really resonated with the work that I do. And I think while it's important to also focus on the big wins, such as how quickly we've developed so very many vaccines that are increasingly covering more and more of the world's population, while a whole lot of vaccine inequity still exists, particularly in countries which are not considered part of the so-called global north. But anyhow, going back to what I feel is the most important issue, and has been since even before the pandemic, but the pandemic has just exacerbated the need for gender inequality. So the impact of crises are never gender neutral, right? And COVID-19 is no exception. So
Right.
What's happened with regards to women and girls, especially when it comes to extreme poverty, unemployment, health, unpaid care, violence against women and girls. Malaysia is such a small country in Southeast Asia, and yet we're recording an almost close to 400% increase in domestic violence cases reported to all the various women's organizations in the first few months alone of movement control orders, right? So basically, if you are also going to be looking at Oxfam's new report, it also echoes many feminist concerns from the start of the pandemic. So gender parity has also regressed from 99 years for the gap to close to roughly about 135 years now. Women collectively have lost $800 billion in earnings in 2020. There's about 13 million fewer women in work now than there were back in 2019. It all boils back down to the fact that roughly 252 men have more wealth than all 1 billion women and girls in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean combined. So I do think that we can only look towards 2022 with a more measured sense of hope and perhaps achievements to come if governments regionally, globally are going to take gender inequality caused and exacerbated by the pandemic seriously. What that's got to mean is definitely more equitable political representation, more women at the table, and not just more women, but also more men who are sensitized, gender sensitized, and are truly committed to working towards rebuilding structures and policy making that can actually affect social equity. So when you talk about gender-based budgets and you talk about gender budgeting, this is not only about ensuring that women and girls get the best of what's there to be offered in a country. It's also ensuring that men and boys, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds, communities, they are also not left behind. Those who are disabled are not left behind. We're also talking about mental disabilities, right? You had mentioned earlier, Viswa, in your introduction about the Great Resignation. I think that is just symptomatic, emblematic, in fact, of the fact that people, even those with extremely stable jobs on the upswing, despite what work from home has meant, what job cuts have meant, they are the ones who are now actually quitting whichever industry they're in droves. Why is this happening? I think it's an overall sense of reckoning with the times that we're living in, and whether or not we like it, we've all been touched in some shape, form, or manner by COVID, be it through loss within our closest familial circles, or perhaps even within our wider social circles, definitely amongst some friends and family and colleagues. I think it's really given us all a sense of, am I really doing what brings out the best in me? Am I most passionate about what I'm doing? So even when it brings up the issue of survival, or as well as the issue of still needing to keep your finances in order, that's why I think you see the Great Resignation happening. So this is actually quite something which is quite uncommon, particularly in highly competitive Southeast Asian societies, right? But we actually see this happening amongst particularly the young Xenials, the younger millennials. What's happening? I think people are really taking stock of their lives. They're really taking stock of what they want 2022 to be. And if it's come to the point where you actually feel liberated by letting go of a job that was in some ways dragging you, pulling you down, I think it's time for not just us to sit around round tables and discuss this, but for more action to happen, you know? I've been moderating webinars, seminars online for the past 2.5 years. And it all starts with, change making. It starts with, caring about mental health, et cetera, et cetera. But how much of that have we seen actually happen for the average person, the average worker,
right,
especially once the vaccines and movement control orders actually loosened up. So I would approach 2022 with caution.
Thank you. Tamina, I've got this question, right?
Sure.
The gap that needs to be filled is humongous. It's a huge gap.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's not going to happen in the natural order of things. The way I see it, it's not going to happen because there's no real motivation or incentive for people who are chauvinistic to actually change their minds, because there's really no penalty. You don't lose anything by sticking to status quo. So if we really want this change to happen, and it is beginning to show signs of happening, do you think there is a case for some form of affirmative action?
Right.
I'm generally not in favor of affirmative action, but when the gap is so wide, is there a case for it?
Right. Okay. So I am in Malaysia. I've lived here for the past 30 years. Mum was Malaysian. And I think what's really important to bear in mind is that affirmative action, when it works in the favor of marginalized minorities, is where it's essential.
Yeah.
In the case of Malaysia, where it's actually been applied in a very opposite sort of scenario, it has actually resulted by and large in an overall marginalization, a deepening of accountability as well as corruption issues, which are some of the main news cycle, highlights that have been swiveling around in Malaysia for the past decade or so, right? With a sheer focus over the 5 years. So coming back to disruption, Biswa, I think it really boils down to the immense hope that we've seen through youth activism and youth political participation and action, especially in countries like even Malaysia, Singapore, where we are increasingly seeing youth going against the status quo. I mean, those who are in their 20s are certainly not of the same perspectives that, we were, our generation or older, when we were in our 20s. And it makes it so easy to organize with the advent of all the social media platforms. Henceforth, everything from crowdfunding to, in Malaysia, for example, community action that approach flood victims in the recent devastating floods that affected 8 states and moved much, much, much faster than the state mechanism and any government agency, right? So all that is extremely hopeful. Now, if that can be channeled into turning old-fashioned norms around policy making and politics and legalese that just holds us down, I think we're in for something truly, truly amazing. But only if we can harness and put the right. Yes, exactly.
If you can harness and channel the energies that are abundant.
Absolutely.
At least in this part of the world for sure, and I'm sure it's the same in Africa. The tremendous amount of youth energy in India, tremendous amount of youth energy. So actually there is some reason for hope because of the sheer number of young people who are emerging, Gen Z, not just millennials, but Gen Z. So thank you very much, Tamina. We'll come back to you later on the same point. Sure. Let's switch to another male on the panel. Kylie, you'll have the last word.
Okay. Am I a male or no? Okay, I'll be the last one.
Okay, Darren, we'll go to you.
Yes.
You're free to respond to any of the other panelists as well.
Yes. Thank you very much for this. And in fact, I actually was planning to do that because, in particular, what you said actually about, because we come from the same country, right? Like we are based in the same country, and what you were saying about the news, bad news spreading fast, and so in what I do, we focus a lot on current affairs and news, and you are right to say that, like good news doesn't catch on. And in today's economy of attention spans, so my boss actually coined this. I'm not sure if he read it somewhere else. I think it was the attention economy or something like that. It's becoming quite depressing actually sometimes if you see how easily certain stories can be spun, because you can start with a piece of good news and almost immediately somebody is going to come around with a negative spin on it to dampen spirits, because that's what's going to sell in today's economy, right? Like TikTok has become such a big thing for people, young people in particular, and you just cannot afford to go long form in such formats. So I recently also experimented a bit.
Do you know, Darren, just quick inject there. There's actually a term. There's actually a term. I just found out based on my research. It's called doom scrolling. Doom scrolling,
yes.
Doom scrolling, right? Doom scrolling. People who just are infected with this need to keep, because people are spending a lot more time, on social media.
Yes.
And because you want to be kept up to date. But there's a vacillation towards bad news.
Exactly.
It's unwitting, but it can be very traumatizing in the end, especially when you're surrounded by doom scrollers.
And not just that, but because the bad news comes from all around the world.
All around.
So when you were saying, when you posed the question, is 2022 going to be a hopeful year? I honestly struggled a bit personally to try to find silver linings. Of course, we come from Singapore. Things over here are pretty stable and they're on the outlook. But depending on which part of the world you are in, things might be really, really bleak. I mean, we are not just talking about COVID, right? Like in some parts of the world, armed conflict is going on. I think the recent developing story in the Ukraine, as well as Myanmar and Afghanistan, and the Hong Kong takeover as well. People in those parts of the world undoubtedly are going to have their hopes dampened for this year because, I mean, lives are being lost. I think in the Ukraine, the war has been going on for 8 years, and it seems to be escalating quite alarmingly right now. And I have friends from the Ukraine, and they're telling me about how tense the situation is. So I think this kind of brings us to the whole inequality thing that has come up many, many times across all of our panelists, which is that depending on which part of the world you're in, you're not being treated fairly, right? In the global north, in the developed part of the world, we have astounding technological development, as Gautam mentioned just now, about the vaccines being developed and approved and distributed in breakneck speed. And yet, as you mentioned early on in your opening, I think only 10% of the combined low-income countries can afford to be fully vaccinated. That's just, I mean, if that's not depressing, I don't know what would be, and not just that, but the scale of problems that are facing us as a generation, as a humankind, such as climate change, which we haven't really talked about yet, those are catastrophic in nature, those are existential in nature. And yet, I think there's this growing recognition that some of these problems simply cannot be changed by individuals' awareness. You can have every single citizen aware of certain issues, such as climate change. However, as long as committed to make a change,
I think the solution lies in making sure that people of my generation just leave the scene. I think that there are too many of us still hanging around. We should just get out of here. We've screwed up the world enough.
Well,
so for that, I apologize on behalf of the billions of irritants who have screwed up the world.
Well,
Yeah.
so the thing is, right? Like, I mean, so I believe I might be the youngest in this panel. For one, I don't have kids. I am only 26. So I actually don't believe that I don't buy into this talk of all dinosaurs having to be removed 100%.
You're calling me a dinosaur?
No. So this is a term that my friends have used. I have quite a few older friends myself. So nothing personal, but I believe that we need to find a common ground for both the older generation and the younger generation. Because in my own talk show, we have hosts from different backgrounds, that cut across, I believe, almost 3 generations. Not huge generations, but like Gen Z, millennial type generations. And it's quite clear how different we view the world. In just a few short years, the way that we view the world is tremendously different. And I believe that this is the case for even the people younger than me. So the people who are the TikTokers, basically. They're going to have a very different view of the world as well. And the thing is, such small gaps of generational thinking, you cannot just get rid of a particular wave of people, because like it or not, at least in Singapore, with 6 million people staying together, and we probably have 6 million different views, and we all have to be able to find some kind of common ground, right? To live together. Space is cramped enough as it is. We can't be kicking people out of the country. So I think part of like the hope that I have actually is finding this middle space. And I do believe, because at least in Singapore, I'm seeing more such initiatives of trying to find the middle ground. I'm actually seeing politicians sometimes come out of the clouds to speak to regular people, understand young people in particular, because of how dramatically different our views are from theirs and from what they are used to in their own circles. So I take heart in that, but I think I agree with Amina in saying that, I'm a bit more measured. I cannot be fully optimistic about 2022, but I do hope that having all of these lessons that we've learned in the past 2 years of just immense human suffering throughout the globe, that hopefully that counts for something. Hopefully we can move forward in a more enlightened manner. But of course, right now, I'm not particularly sure how grounded that observation is going to be, given that you have opportunists around the world as well capitalizing on this travesty and tragedy for their own profit and for their own power. Right.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. And if it's any consolation, right? I've been a mediator, a commercial mediator, for coming to 25 years, and in the 25 years of mediating commercial disputes, and some of them are very significant, I've only not settled one in 25 years. So, your optimism is well placed. If you believe, as a mediator, I believe that we can find common ground. I go into the mediation on the assumption that I will be able to find the middle ground, the shared interest, and I go searching for it, and then I share it, and that's the solution. But if you are a naysayer, you can't be a mediator. So I think we need a lot more neutral arbiters in this world. Yes. It cannot be zero sum. It cannot be get rid of the dinosaurs, even though I said it just now. It cannot be. I was just being provocative. But it is about believing that common sense will reign if we look for it and if we find it in people, because every one of us has it. And I think that belief has to go along with supporting important causes like gender diversity, empowerment. All those things will happen, but it shouldn't be, in my view, a zero-sum approach. It shouldn't be, for you to win, I have to lose. We can both win, but you need to search for it, and then you need to persuade people to believe in that. Yes, that's my own view on what you just shared. Thank you very much. All right, Kylie, thank you for waiting.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Oh, just to quickly follow on what Darren has sharing. I think that because a lot of time we are talking about how this conversation online or social media is really divided. And because I do a podcast in Taiwan, so what we believe is that we think long form conversation is really important, because a lot of time people just go on Twitter and they quote each other on one sentence, and they fight and they hate each other. And I think we're all on the so opposite side of the spectrum, but which is not true. So in our show, we do invite many different people among different generations, or even the opposite political spectrum, and to sit down. Of course, we have stuff that we disagree, but you will find always in the end that we have more common ground than our, differences. So just to follow on that, I really want to share. And then I think it works pretty well, at least from my experience in Taiwan. And but I think today I'm going to provide a little more different perspective, because I want to focus a little more on freedom of speech and freedom to create. In Taiwan, it's a little special experience as a Taiwanese, because for the past 2 years, many big Taiwanese celebrities who used to only focus on the Chinese market have come back to Taiwan, partially because of COVID. Of course, nothing could be done there in China, but also because China has been cracking down on freedom of speech. Doesn't matter if it's a movie, a TV show, or just a performance at a comedy club. So because of the restriction of freedom of speech in China recently, especially for these 2 years, some Taiwanese celebrities are banned in China, and maybe because they mentioned something a little more sensitive. So some of them lost their shows, or they lost their sponsorship. So a lot of them had to leave China and came back to Taiwan. Of course, it's a little controversial in Taiwan, but for me, I think this is an optimistic thing, because these big Taiwanese celebrities, they brought their experiences, their talents, their resources back with them to Taiwan, and they started to reinvest in Taiwan. So we have seen a lot of new TV shows, dramas, and even YouTube channels, like big names from China, Taiwanese celebrities from China. They will be like help produce like really good YouTube channels or shows. So I think that's a good thing. So for me, I'm a podcaster and a comedian. I think that I really want to join and ride this new creativity boom within Taiwan. So we are currently making a new English late night show in Taiwan. And nobody has done this in Taiwan. I mean, there are some late night show in Chinese, but none of them is in English. So I'm really excited. So we are spending our own money. It costs a lot of money. Oh my God, it's like insane. I don't know how expensive it was before I started to after I started to do it. But in the English late night show, we will approach many different topics like South China Sea and pandemic, same-sex marriage, gender equality, or even China's military threats towards Taiwan. But of course, from a Taiwanese perspective, and I think this is not frequently heard on the mainstream English media. So we think that through this new show, we aim to, of course, reach out to more English-speaking audience, but we want to use humor and comedy sketches and to help people understand each other a little more, and to give people a good laugh, and to let people think that there's always actually light at the end of the tunnel, and which is 2022. So I think it's hopeful. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Kylie. I love what you said about humor. I really think it's underused and underappreciated in this world, at least in Asia. I think we tend to take ourselves very, very seriously.
Exactly.
Seriously. Yeah. I mean, I can talk about Singapore. I think our politicians can afford to chill a bit more. I think Malaysian politicians are a lot more open to being, subjects of satire. But in Singapore, we don't have that. But I think I really agree with you that humor can be a powerful palliative. It can be a wonderful way of making us realize points without actually becoming defensive. But it's one of the most difficult things to do.
It is,
because
it costs a lot of money.
And I don't know what we can do about the money, but you could get sued.
Exactly.
Be very careful about doing that in Singapore if you have any such plans, because you'll be sued for libel, defamation, and the works. But I'd like to ask you, why do you think freedom of speech is important, and how do you draw the line between the freedom to criticize and condemn and the right to retaliate?
Okay.
I'm talking in specific terms, for example, to what happened to Charlie Hebdo in Paris. When you can exercise your freedom to express, and to you that is humor, that is cartoon. To someone else, that is my religion. I'm not defending either side.
Yeah.
So how do you strike a balance between freedom to express and the freedom to retaliate?
I think that's a really difficult question. Of course, I think this is an ongoing adjustment based on, which age or which time you are in. But as a Taiwanese, it's a little different because Taiwanese people tend to be like, they don't like to speak up for a lot of stuff, especially we, share markets with China. And for Chinese market, it's a lot more sensitive to talk about a lot of stuff. Such as gender equality, because Taiwan just passed our same-sex marriage 3 years ago. And people might get into troubles just because they support same-sex marriage. So I think because the restriction from China is getting like a little tougher, especially for these past 2 years.
Right.
So in Taiwan, we are not there to talk about, religion or, there yet. We are just talking about our people. Can people freely talk about what they think, as a person? And then that is a little hard even right now. When we are doing our talk show, and we try to work with a lot of like YouTubers and celebrities or artists. And a lot of them don't want to work with us. They say that, we fully support you in private. But they said that, even though you guys didn't go like really controversial, but you guys talked a little bit about, diplomacy and politics, and that might be a little dangerous for them. So this is the difficulty that we encounter.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a good juncture and good point for us to segue into comments and perspectives from our young people.
Yeah.
So we've got Ramita, we've got Richard, we've got Edison. Anyone? We are dying to hear young people's views.
Hi guys, I would love to speak about this. I would actually like to add on to Kylie's, Kylie mentioned a creativity boom in the country. I live in India and we're still like, earlier you said we go 2 steps forward and we come 5 steps backwards. India comes 500 steps backwards. It, like it's a very culturally rooted opinion about how things aren't too open here, but we're trying to do our best. We're trying to explain to the older generation what, we want to make the best of our time. Even Tamina mentioned earlier about how people kind of realized over time that they were stuck in jobs that they did not enjoy, and that time is limited and we must do our best and, do things that we love doing and enjoy. Hence, like I have seen the creativity boom throughout the pandemic. The reason it brings me some hope is because things going online for us, what that meant was that we had a world full of things to research on. We could connect to people everywhere in the world. And like, as Gautam said, we crave human connection. And if it had to be, and the only drawback of that was we had to reduce points of touch. Physical touch. But that could, what the whole online scenario, what that did for us was that we could reach out to more people. In fact, an example would be that arts was booming here. Artists made their NFTs, like you mentioned. They earned from that. There was a new whole currency that came about that you could, that could be your asset. And your assets increased that way. In fact, we're currently working over here on getting musicians to distribute their music as NFTs now. So the audience also kind of thinks of that as an asset to hold on to. That way your audience ends up investing in your music.
Yeah.
And
so just for the others who may not know what NFT is, it's a non-fungible token. Could you share a little bit more for everyone how this actually works, very briefly?
So think of it as like a stock in the market, how you would hold a stock. NFT is kind of a different currency. You buy an NFT in, like, a person could, for example, an artist could upload their songs as an NFT. You end up buying that NFT and you hold value to it. The only thing is that once you've bought that song as an NFT, you hold on to it and you can resell it at a higher price later. So it becomes your value asset as well. And the royalty also goes back to the artist who's created it.
And how is it different from cryptocurrency, NFTs?
I'm not, again, like, I'm not like the most techie person, so I wouldn't want to get into that and, give any misinformation. But what I'm saying is it's a new form of doing things. And that's what the pandemic made us do. The human race has always adjusted to things. They've, found ways to like go beyond what their limitations basically. So that's something that I saw as a positive thing in the pandemic. The second sign of it, of course, I've spoken about the creativity boom. The second part that I want to speak about is mental health. In my country, mental health is taboo. Like if you go tell your parents that I feel depressed, they would not understand that. However, they've been more open to it. There have been online consults now. Therapy is coming about. It's spoken more widely, and people are accepting the fact that mental health is a part of healthcare. You don't have to be physically sick. That's not it. Like you don't need a doctor just for that, but you need a doctor for the mind, just to deal with your emotions. And that is something that I feel is it's a blessing to us, for that matter.
That there's an acknowledgement of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And is this because there has been a lot more, there's been a significant increase in mental conditions because of the stress that comes about because of COVID? Absolutely.
Yeah. And it even COVID causes something called brain fog, right?
Yes.
And people, like, this entire confusion of things, you do need another human being to kind of help you out, to kind of guide you. And a professional, like mental health professionals have been on the rise here. They've been working constantly on pro bono basis. And this was never something that was, validated in India before. And now it's encouraged. And that's really healthy for everybody.
Right. Thank you, Ramita. Edison, Richard, anyone?
Yeah, I'll
yes, Edison.
So,
yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Edison from the UK. Vishwa, earlier you said you wanted politicians to use humor more. We've got Boris here, so I'm going to have to disagree.
No, that's the difference between humor and that's the difference between humor and joke.
Yeah. No, I understand. But on a serious note, I think I'm really hopeful actually for 2022 because we can't afford not to be. And I think the way that I think about all that we've gone through in the last 2 years, I almost think I'm not particularly religious, but it's God's way of giving us a dry run for the real battle ahead, which is ecological and climate breakdown. And that's something that hasn't been touched too much so far. But in many ways, the pandemic is a dry run for that. And I think when I work in education, and when I speak to a lot of young people, that's something which is a big priority for them. Yeah. And the reason why I said that the pandemic is a dry run for our battle against climate change is that if you think about it, what we're going through right now, particularly with Omicron variant, has been a symptom of our unequal world. And it's the cost of that inequality when we look at vaccine distribution and how a lot of kind of developed countries, those with more financial capital, have essentially hoarded vaccines, and I include the UK in that. And the consequence of that inequality has been, this new variant. We're not all safe until all of us have equal access to vaccines. And in many ways, the battle with climate is going to be exactly the same. Yeah. Unless we tackle the massive unequal distributions that we find in for instance, carbon emissions and historical carbon emissions and also current emissions, we're not going to tackle this global issue together. And I think the reason why I'm hopeful is that I see those kind of that change happening in the younger generation. And I agree with Darren earlier comments in that we do have to find some common ground. Mm-hmm. I think the question for me is, currently our power structures don't provide us easy ways to bring younger voices to the table. So I guess my question is for everyone on this call is, whatever tables or that we are on, whether they're big or small, we all have some table and some platform. How are we bringing those younger voices to those tables? So I think that's the question that I want to leave people with.
I think that's a very, very important question. Not only, I mean, we've been talking about two groups of people so far, right? One, younger voices. Second, women. Both need permanent seats on the table, seats that are tenured. You see what I mean? If it's not tenured and protected, those voices will not be authentic. You know, because what we don't want is voices that are sponsored. There's a difference. And I think, you know, when we go the way of quotas and affirmative action, sometimes it's very easy to whitewash and just put some people there who seemingly represent certain constituencies, but they don't. And that actually puts us in a worse situation because it is a facade. And it gives us a false sense of confidence that things are chugging along when actually you're going backwards. So I think authenticity is very important, and the way the process is very important. How we make sure that those voices are genuine voices of youth who are representing youth and not some other particular constituency above that. You know, but I think it's a very important question you've asked. Going back to the point about climate change, I'll be interested to hear your view as well as the others. This year is going to be COP27 in Egypt. Mm-hmm. The general sense I get is that most people aren't giving a thumbs up to COP26 in Glasgow. You know, personally, I think we have achieved something, not as significant as COP21 in Paris, but significant because of certain things like China and the USA actually agreeing to come together to meet certain carbon emission targets, you know, which are supposed to be 2050 and so on. But it doesn't seem to appease the demands of young people. Obviously, young people are a lot more anxious than we are, people like me. But how do we make sure that 2022 in Egypt, COP27, actually makes up for some of the disappointments with COP26? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean,
what can we do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it starts with recognizing all of the lessons that we've had in the last 2 years in terms of what is possible when we know what's important. And I think the pandemic for all of us has had a really crystallizing effect on what we value in life. And earlier, you know, Gautam spoke about the importance of, you know, social contact and connectedness, for instance. It's all made us realize certain things. And I think what I realized in the pandemic is more things are more possible than we ever thought was possible before, because the pandemic has kind of unlocked new parts of our kind of public imagination. So I think that's what we really need to take to this climate, the next COP conference. And I'll give you a small example. For instance, you know, during the pandemic, homelessness in London was completely eradicated. Overnight, we housed all of the homeless people in all the vacant hotels and all the vacant buildings in London overnight. And we in one day we just got rid of a problem, which is a stain on our national character, that we have so many homeless people in the 5th richest country in the world. And so, like, when I think about what was done during the pandemic, the mighty machinery of nation state and the power that wields, we can do so much more for climate change. And I think that's the kind of the approach that we need to take in the next COP.
I guess what you're intimating also is that, you know, young people, if you put young people and say more women on the table where decisions are made, be it climate change, the outcome would be, I believe, significantly different.
Yeah, it could be really radical.
And you can be creative in coming up with solutions. As Kylie is coming up with a creative way of creating awareness, not your usual way, but we all need to find different pathways to achieve the kind of goals that we all know we need to. When certain doors are shut in front of us, we need to not, instead of throwing our arms up in despair, we need to go out there and find new ways of doing it. And I think this is something young people particularly are good at, because you have the energy, I guess, extra energy, and you're not encrusted. Your ideas are not encrusted. And so it's easier for you to think out of the box and think of different ways of achieving the same outcome. And I think that sort of attitude is very important. So I'd like to throw open the question to the others, the panelists, and even members of the audience participating here. What else can be done to engage young people, to engage constructively and meaningfully women, a lot more women and young people? What can be done from your own experience, from your own observation? Gautam, any views on that?
I think that's a great question, but let me suggest that it's a two-sided question, right?
Yeah.
So in order to engage young people and to engage women in politics in particular, governments have to deliver for them.
Yeah.
Right? In the United States, and this is true in general across industrialized countries, are countries where if you judge their priority by their budget, right, the primary interest of the United States government is taking care of older people, right? That's what the U.S. government spends its money on at the first order. So so if you are a younger person, it's not unreasonable for you to say that the government is not delivering for me, and therefore why should I get involved? That's an understandable reaction. And what we've seen right now here is this enormous political debate where the American political system has just been convulsed by an attempt to sort of change spending priorities in a way that will benefit young people profoundly, and everything from infrastructure investments to climate change. But it's a two-sided question, because while it's perfectly normal to say that the system is not delivering for me, therefore I won't get involved, it's wrong. Right? That is a fundamental mistake in the way in thinking about the way the system works. The system doesn't deliver for you because you are not involved. Right? It is the other way. Involvement leads to products, not the other way around. Politicians do not respond to people who do not vote. And in the United States, young people don't vote. Right? So it is the responsibility of leaders and of government to deliver for young people, because what at the end of the day is the purpose of government if it is not to secure a future for our societies. But it is equally the responsibility of young people to get involved and force them to deliver. And if they do not, if they don't do that, then at the end of the day, it really is on their own hands that the failure of that failure.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, if you want something, step into the arena and stop being a spectator. I guess that's the point. And Anele, you have some. Yeah.
I'm so glad that Edison raised the whole climate change and the young people thing, because this is why initially I led with, the percentage of the youth that is unemployed in South Africa. I think it's very difficult to involve somebody who's been kept out of the conversation commercially. And if I don't have a job and I don't have a purpose, then you can't only call on me when you want me to side with you, which is what Gautam was saying, is that, with our youth, they just don't involve themselves. Somebody touched on the attention economy earlier. The youth in South Africa has got a very short span when it comes to attention. They jump on things and that's it, and then they move. And which is so different to the youth of 1976. They are the reason why South Africa came out of apartheid. The Nelson Mandelas, when they were young, they were so passionate and they stuck to a cause. Now cut to 2022, when there are so many causes, it's no longer just, do we want to be equal in our society? There are many things that we're fighting. So then we go to climate change. Climate change is not important in South Africa because people are hungry. I can't owe my stomach. We can't leave my stomach for later, but there is a very big notion that I can leave climate change for later, right? Right now I'm hungry. Right now I am jobless. Right now I am homeless. And this is another reason why I touched on a dual existence earlier, because, you know, growing up, and I know all of us come from countries where there's a rural side of it. We are all here and we are all tech savvy and we're on Zoom and all of it. But in South Africa, there's a very small percentage of people who can sit like this at a computer and talk to the world as we are doing right now. You know, there is a very big part that is under the poverty line in rural areas, without water, without electricity. Right. So that is their focus. It can't be climate change. But the dual existence is important because the people in the rural areas, they are actually living green.
Yes.
But we don't want to involve them because there's an element of just because you are poor, it means you are dumber. So you can't be called to the table. Those tables where we're speaking about climate change, Edison, in my country, they should be calling on the ones that have never had a say, but they wake up in the morning and they go to the river to get themselves water.
Right.
And then they build fire to purify the water, and that's what they drink. They grow their own crops. They grow their own cattle. They have a sustainable living by themselves. And ultimately, that is how we're going to attack climate change. But in South Africa, we're too busy being higher LSM. We're too busy being highbrow when we solve problems. And we forget that we're leaving a very integral part out of the conversation. Right. And I would suspect, Wiswat, that the rest of the world is doing the same thing wrong.
No, I think it's so important. The point that you raised, it's very, very important, because we tend to ignore people, smaller constituencies that are already experiencing something. They've got experience, lived experience to share. You know, in a country such as South Africa, even Malaysia, which is not very large, they have different constituencies that need to share their perspectives so that we learn from each other, and we allow ourselves to be influenced by each other. You know, I think that's important. I see, Richard, you want to say something, and then we'll go to you, Tamina, after that. Richard, go ahead.
Right, thank you. So first of all, I'd like to say, like, I think everyone here has raised like amazing points. Everyone's really brought something to the table. So on this note of youth empowerment, and especially the voice of youth being heard in the political scheme, I think, Wiswa, you just mentioned how people should stop being spectators and join the arena. So on that note, I think Tamina can probably attest to this. There's been a lack of, how do I say, respect and lack of taking youth seriously in Malaysia. So 4 years ago, I think it was about 4 years ago, Malaysia passed a constitutional amendment to lower the voting age and the age at which you can run for parliament
office
from 21 to 18, and it took 3 to 4 years for them to actually enact it, and that was met by a lot of criticism by government, as they didn't really think that youth were mature enough, were capable of making these kind of high level decisions that will obviously impact the country. And it took a really long time, and I'm glad to say, like, last month it was finally gazetted. But that just goes to show, I have met a lot of youth, a lot of young people my age, younger even, that are really capable and have a lot of ideas, a lot of perspectives that would really bring a really positive impact to the country. And sadly, like, up until very recently, they weren't able to, they weren't taken seriously. And that just goes to show, I think Anele, she mentioned this earlier on, that it really struck me when she said that there was one type of person in charge, and that's particularly evident in Malaysia. So in the height of the pandemic last year, when thousands of people were being hospitalized, we were at record number of cases, the leaders were having too much of focus on power and retaining power. There was a power struggle going on in parliament, and that just left people who were less fortunate, who weren't as well off or may have lost jobs. They were being neglected, and it was quite sad to see. So when I would go around in the streets, and you'd see people lining up, lines as long as you can see in front of soup kitchens, and it really changed your perspective of how actually this pandemic has affected everyone. And I guess people up in the upper echelons of parliament were either ignorant to seeing that, possibly didn't want to face the reality of their decisions being so critical to how everyone was being affected, especially the ones who were less fortunate. Yeah.
So I hear you, Richard. And just a quick point before we go to Temina. You know, compared to when I was a kid, when I was your age, that time there was no internet. It was a lot more difficult, you know, to take to the streets, to get people to galvanize public support, peer support. But today, it is so possible. I mean, social media, the internet, and now metaverse, all these things are empowering, are meant to empower us. So we don't need actually to wait for the parliamentarians or the powers that be to actually move. If they don't want to move, we can move it. And I think the point that Tamina made earlier on is very, very important. You know, when young people, Gen Z, when they demonstrate that they can walk away from the job, now that's hard for employers to take after some time. You know, when people are strong enough, empowered enough to walk away from the job without an alternative job, that's a powerful signal. You know, so on that note, I'd like to go to Tamina now. Yes, Tamina.
Sure thing. Thanks for that, Visva. And I just wanted to say that I'm so glad Edison actually brought up the climate crisis issue, as well as Anela's insightful comments and thoughts on that. But I just wanted to give us a little bit more food for thought, just on this topic itself, because it's often seen as something that the youth perhaps don't directly have the capacity to be able to bring about change making. So I think it's old news. We all know that just about 100 companies are responsible for 70% of global emissions. These companies, their investors, they are the ones who hold the key to systemic change on carbon emissions, tackling the climate crisis. So at every COP, they are the ones who we need to be putting the most pressure on, right? Not just the governments of the countries where these companies are. But let's now move to the supersized impact of certain so-called benignly and favorably framed activities. Basically, I'm talking about Bitcoin, I'm talking about NFT. So now, how Bitcoins and NFTs work is one whole issue, right? But on the other hand, what exactly fuels Bitcoin's NFTs? That is a whole other kettle of fish. So I just like to break it down and have us keep this as something cognizant as we go forth on thinking about how each one of us are actually able to impact at least a small modicum of the climate crisis. So basically, to mint an NFT, computers need to solve a complex equation. It takes giant servers running 24/7 to do this on this immense scale. And those servers, they use obscene amounts of energy. More energy usage without renewables mean the environment is drained of even more resources. And the misinformation and disinformation surrounding NFTs, Bitcoin, blockchains, and all of this, and this wider sphere is actually what results in, for example, feminist artists being extremely proud of the money that they have earned through NFTs. Okay, so mining Bitcoin was basically the same thing. Solving these equations, it takes these rooms full of computers hammering away all the time. And when one or more solves a problem, voila, a Bitcoin is born. So NFTs enforce artificial scarcity at the cost of collapsing power grids. It's distilled capitalism, and it's devastating and absolutely inexcusable considering the climate crisis. I just wanted us to keep that cognizant as part of our thinking as we move forward with the discussion. Yeah,
it's an excellent point. And it has been brought up. In fact, I believe this was actually brought up in some of the plenaries in Glasgow, but obviously didn't get enough attention and airtime. So some people have actually described the group that is championing cryptocurrency, not just Bitcoin, but cryptocurrency as a whole, and NFTs and blockchain technology, all of these things as a new mafia. You know, so we could be at risk of this group intentionally or unwittingly exacerbating the problem of climate change. But I think your reminder is timely. Thank you very much, Darren.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I guess I kind of wanted to do what Amina did, which was to kind of come in with a bit of a devil's advocate, if you could put it that way. So Anela, I love your energy, but I just want to come in a bit with some counterpoint regarding your point on the all people ruling are of the same class globally. Okay, so I mean, perhaps that is the case in South Africa, but I was just thinking, because I think we were talking about the global climate problem. And it just occurred to me that different countries have fundamentally different stakes in the issue. And Nelly, you actually raised that with when you were talking about the extreme poverty that many South Africans face. And therefore, climate change, something that, you know, affects all of humankind equally, it just cannot be at the top of the priority. And there are some countries where, I mean, unfortunately, some opportunists might actually look at the climate change catastrophe as an opportunity. So I've heard reports talking about how certain parts of the world, with rising sea levels or with melting ice caps and melting frozen oceans and seas, it actually opens up geostrategic points in their countries, in their territory, to further expand their power in the region. And unfortunately, you know, countries like Singapore, we are an island nation, right, smack in the middle of the earth and the equator. We are going to be one of the ones first hit, right, when sea levels rise. And unfortunately, some of these other countries further up north, some of these other countries with big potential gains from melting ice caps, they're not going to see the climate problem in the same way that we do. They're not going to see it in the same fundamental and existential driven problem and angle that we do. In the same way that the COVID issue as well, I think, was framed, right? For many people, it is and is continuing to be a matter of life and death. But for some corporations, it's a matter of money. And I recall that earlier on, I think last year, there was this big issue in Europe surrounding whether or not to allow, I think it was, I can't remember what the term is, the vaccines to be sold. I think the blueprints for the vaccines to be given to developing countries. The term is running away from me right now. But yeah, so basically my point is that, you know, unfortunately, as much as the world has to be united in standing across some of these problems, it's not going to be. And I mean, I don't know if maybe I'm just being a pessimist or what, but because people just have very different stakes in some of these issues, when really it shouldn't be. We should stand together as a united humankind. But as far as it seems right now, it seems that people have vested interests and different stakes in the problem. And I sometimes get really sad thinking about this, because it's easy to say that, you know, the world should stand together, that Putin and Biden and Xi Jinping should just, you know, hold hands and come together to make certain things work. But each of them have such vested interests in their own power and in their own global interests that I don't know how we're going to get there.
Yeah, but Darren, that's been the case since time immemorial. It's the nature of the beast, you know. Yes. So we can't be sitting back and saying that's the way it is. No, I think that's not going to change, but we need to find change other ways. You know, that's why I feel strongly that we should, governments, G2G relationships come with a lot of limitations, naturally.
Yes.
Right? So that's the reason why we have to think about track 2, track 3, track 4, you know, which could be academic institutions actually coming together to have conversations, commercial institutions or organizations coming together, NGOs, people sector, that you can start building tracks. And those tracks need not be face-to-face. They can be on cyberspace as well. Today, there's so many ways we can do that. And then you start applying the kind of pressure to temper extreme actions. That's the only way, you know. But politicians, you know, will behave as politicians anywhere in the world, and they will have vested interests, and that's the nature of the beast, so to speak. You know, but I think we need to continue to believe that we as individuals and as a small collective can do something. I mean, that's the whole purpose of right. We have to. We don't have a choice, and that's the reason why we're having this discussion today. You know, we're all prepared to commit some time to come together and do it. I mean, I'm not making any money out of this, but somebody's got to do it. We do it, and I'm so pleased that people from different parts of the world, and some of you in unearthly hours, are here participating. You can dismiss it as this is just going to be talk and nothing else, but I personally have learned a lot of things from today's discussion. Some of them are fresh perspectives, some of them are critical reminders. But we all need to be reminded by friends who have slightly different perspectives from time to time. You know, I'd like to suggest that we wind up at this point in time, and I have a very simple question, and I'll appreciate it if you keep your response to a minute. Just one wish that you have for this year, one wish, and if possible, a workable wish. It can be a difficult one, but a workable one that is top of your wish list. One. I'd like to start with Kylie. Yeah.
So I think that, of course, this is a really difficult time for a lot of us, but I think this is a special time because this is the first time the whole world is faced with the same one challenge altogether, which is COVID. So maybe this is the best opportunity for us to tell a story in a way that can be understood by, everyone across culture. So maybe that's time for us to raise some kind of awareness by storytelling.
And storytelling where the ideas transcend culture.
Exactly. Yes.
And linguistic barriers, perhaps even. Right.
Exactly.
Thank you. Edison.
I would say my one wish is as we emerge out of this pandemic, we have to think about not just a green-led recovery, but also an education-related recovery, because I think only then can our young people develop the skills and knowledge to really build that new world with all the new technologies that are available. Build that new world as we emerge out of the pandemic.
Great, thank you. Temina?
My parting thoughts would be that I hope that as a journalist, that freedom of expression in Malaysia can help uplift the most marginalized of voices, because it is through hearing them, their stories, and actualizing their realities and making them better that we can get better as a whole. I'm talking about those affected by police abuse and impunity, refugees, asylum seekers, trafficking victims, of course, everyone who's been impacted by COVID-19, particularly from marginalized communities. And yes, also those who are suffering from oppression due to sexual orientation and gender identity. And most importantly, perhaps, the indigenous peoples in Malaysia. Yes. So as long as we can uplift these voices, listen to their stories, I think we can make for a better Malaysia just within 2022. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Temina. Darren.
So I think my wish would be that for more people to laugh with each other rather than at each other, because I think the past 2 years have really driven up a lot of social tension and a lot of social divide. And I think that that's not going to help us in any way in resolving and facing any of these problems that we have.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Ramita?
My one wish would be that mental health stops being tabooed and people can get more help.
That's a wish that I think all of us will sign up for.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. Thank you for reminding us. Richard.
So my one wish would be for people as we all come out of this pandemic, to appreciate the value of friendship, family, relationships, because I think one big lesson that this pandemic has taught to some extent everyone is the value of the ones we hold dear to us, because I don't know I'm pretty sure everyone can relate. Like, I have not seen a lot of my friends and family members for good over 2 years now. And I was talking to someone about this, and they said that maybe one good thing of this pandemic would be we'll finally be able to value the ones that we hold dear more, because I think prior to this pandemic, we may have taken it for granted, the fact of just meeting an old friend or family reunions. Yeah. I know it's a small thing, but I think it's really inherent and really deep to us as humans, this value of relationship.
Well, if you want that feeling to sustain, unfortunately, I think the pandemic has to go on forever, because the moment it ends, we go back to old habits. That's the nature of us,
that's
unfortunately. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Richard. Anele?
My one wish is for more conversations like this that are quite informative across countries to happen, because I really have learned a lot. Specifically for my country is for the the poverty gap to just decrease, because it is way, way, way too wide in terms of the income bracket, for more women, more people of color to be put at the table, not just to be mined and to be used for profit, but to actually make change. And also for Kylie to get money to do her show. Really.
Yes, Kylie, you've got
thank you.
supporters
Oh my God, thank you.
from all over the world.
Thank
We're
you.
going to support you. Well said, Anele. Thank you. Gautam, you have the last word.
Oh, thank you, Viswa. So then I'll leave it the simplest one. My wish is simple, that if it is available to you, and I hope that by the end of over the course of 2022, it will be available to everyone in the world, you get vaccinated. It's really, we will not be able to solve anything else until we get this over and done with. So my wish is that every single person will get vaccinated as soon as possible.
Oh, fantastic! With that jab from Gautam, I'd like to thank all 5 of the panelists: Anele, Gautam, Temina, Kylie, and Darren, and of course our youth voices, Ramita, Edison, and Richard. And my special thanks to the rest of you for making time to join us. I'd like to see what we're going through now as a timely opportunity. As Richard mentioned, it's an opportunity to enhance our strengths, to reconnect, to realize the importance of reconnecting with fellow human beings, not just within our own country, within our own culture, within our own religion, language, to realize that we actually are meant to be connected across boundaries, because when a common problem like this happens, we need to find a common solution, and we need to find some way to work together. So we need to find a way to enhance our strengths and to acknowledge and mitigate our weaknesses. So what we have is a gift. Let's use it well. And hope is what gives us the wherewithal to manage this turmoil, this uncertainty. Now, President Barack Obama put it most aptly, and I'd like to quote him: "Hope in the face of difficulty, hope in the face of uncertainty, the audacity of hope, in the end, that is God's greatest gift to us. A belief in things not seen, a belief that there are better days ahead." This was Inconvenient Questions, where ideas awaken. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we have all learned a lot, and let's stay connected, and let's listen to the good advice from Gautam: get vaccinated. And if you can't, go to Gautam. He'll arrange it for us. and all the farmers are many of them are on NASDAQ, aren't they? Or on the main board.
What? Say it again, this one?
The pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
You know the CEOs of these pharmaceutical companies.
Sure. 1 or 2.
Yeah. So if any of you have a problem, you go to Gautam. He'll speak to the CEO and make sure you get the vaccine.
Well, I actually say the RNA vaccines are quite difficult to manufacture, but my guess is by the end of the year, there will be almost nowhere on Earth where they're not pretty easy to get.
Absolutely. Right. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. And have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.